Quiet discipline. How to build discipline without willpower. Guided by the Quiet Guide. If you have ever looked at someone who seems effortlessly disciplined and wondered what is wrong with you, nothing is wrong with you. The problem is not that you lack willpower. The problem is that nobody ever told you willpower was never meant to carry the full weight of a disciplined life. Most people spend years blaming themselves for not having enough of something that was never designed to work the way they were told it would. This video is about a different way, a quiet way, a way that does not rely on gritting your teeth or waking up at 4 a.m. or punishing yourself into submission. What we are going to look at could shift the way you relate to discipline entirely, not by adding more force, but by understanding what actually drives consistent action and building from there. Let's start with why willpower keeps failing you. We arrive now at why willpower keeps failing you, and this is where most people get stuck for years without ever understanding why. Once you see the mechanism behind the failure, you stop blaming yourself and start building something that actually works. Why willpower keeps failing you. The willpower myth. There is a story most of us were handed early. It goes something like this. Disciplined people have strong willpower. Undisciplined people have weak willpower. If you want to be more disciplined, you simply need to try harder. This story is clean, it is simple, and it is almost entirely wrong. Ask yourself, when was the last time willpower alone carried you through something difficult for more than a few weeks? If you are honest, the answer is probably never. Not because you are weak, but because willpower was never built for the long haul. The psychologist Roy Baumeister spent decades studying what he called ego depletion, the idea that willpower is a finite resource that gets used up over the course of a day. Every decision you make, every temptation you resist, every moment of self-control, it draws from the same limited well. By evening, the well is dry. That is why your disciplined intentions at 8 a.m. dissolve by 9 p.m. It is not a character flaw. It is biology. But here is what Baumeister's later research and the work of researchers like Carol Dweck have clarified. Willpower depletes fastest in people who believe it is limited. The very belief that willpower runs out makes it run out faster, which means the first step toward quiet discipline is not more effort. It is a different understanding entirely. The hidden cost of relying on willpower. Here is one many people do not notice. When you rely on willpower as your primary engine, you are not just exhausting yourself. You are training yourself to associate discipline with suffering. Every time you force yourself through something painful, your brain logs the experience. Discipline equals pain. Discipline equals depletion. Discipline equals something to be avoided. So the very strategy you are using to build discipline is teaching your brain to resist it. This is not a theory. It is how the dopamine system works. Dr. Andrew Huberman at Stanford has shown that motivation and sustained effort are not driven by force. They are driven by dopamine release in anticipation of reward. When discipline feels like punishment, dopamine drops. When dopamine drops, effort collapses. The people who seem effortlessly disciplined are not exerting more force. They have simply built systems where discipline does not feel like punishment, which brings us to the shift that changes everything. From willpower to design. The most disciplined people you know did not win a war against themselves. They simply stopped fighting it. They designed their lives so that the disciplined choice became the easiest choice, the natural choice, the choice that required the least resistance. James Clear, in his work on habit formation, put it this way: you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Willpower is a goal-level strategy. It says, I will force myself to do this. Systems are a design-level strategy. They say, I will arrange my life so that doing this feels inevitable. That is the pivot, and once you make it, everything that follows becomes easier. Moving on to the person you believe you are, because before any system can work, there is a deeper layer that determines whether you will stick with it or abandon it in 3 weeks. We arrive now at the person you believe you are, and this is the part most discipline advice skips entirely. It is the quiet architecture beneath every habit you have ever kept or broken. The person you believe you are. Identity precedes action. Here is something most people get backward. They believe that if they act disciplined, they will become disciplined. Fake it until you make it. But the research tells a different story. James Clear's work on identity-based habits reveals that behavior that sticks is behavior that aligns with who you already believe yourself to be. If you believe you are someone who struggles with discipline, every disciplined action feels like a performance, an act, something you are doing despite who you are. And performances end, they always do. The shift happens when you stop trying to act like a disciplined person and start seeing yourself as someone for whom discipline is simply how you move through the world. This is not motivational fluff. It is backed by decades of research on self-concept and behavior change. The psychologist Leon Festinger's work on cognitive dissonance showed that humans have a profound need to align their actions with their beliefs. When your actions and your identity conflict, one of them has to give. Most people let their identity give. They try a new habit, it feels foreign, and their brain says, "This is not who you are," and they stop. Quiet discipline works the other way. You anchor the identity first. The actions follow naturally. The identity you are currently carrying. This next one hits harder than most. Ask yourself, when was the last time you examined the identity you are carrying around discipline? Not the identity you want, the one you actually operate from. Most people have an identity around discipline that was handed to them by a parent who called them lazy, by a teacher who said they lacked focus, by a string of failed habits that reinforced the same story. You have been telling yourself a story about who you are, and that story has been running in the background of every attempt you have ever made to change. If the story is, "I am someone who starts strong but cannot sustain," then sustaining will always feel like swimming upstream, because your brain will always move toward coherence, toward making your actions match your story. The quiet work here, the work most people skip, is rewriting the story itself. Not through affirmations, not through pretending, but through evidence. Evidence over affirmation. Here is what helps. You do not need to convince yourself you are disciplined. You need to prove it to yourself in small, undeniable ways. Start with something so small it feels almost trivial. Make your bed. Drink a glass of water when you wake. Write one sentence. Walk for 5 minutes. Do it every day. Not for the result, for the evidence. Because every time you do what you said you would do, even in something microscopic, you are depositing into the identity account. You are building a body of proof that says, "I am someone who follows through." Cal Newport, in his work on deep work and deliberate practice, talks about the importance of what he calls productive meditation, the practice of training your mind through small, consistent acts of focus. The same principle applies to identity. You do not think your way into a new identity. You act your way into it, one small act at a time. And once that identity begins to solidify, the systems we are about to look at stop feeling like effort. They feel like expression. Before we move into the systems themselves, I want to pause on something. Roughly 80% of people watching this have not subscribed yet, and that matters. It helps this reach others who are carrying the same weight quietly, and it tells us this kind of content is worth continuing to build. Now let's move on to the environment that disciplines for you. We arrive now at the environment that disciplines for you, and this is where quiet discipline pulls ahead of everything else. Most people try to change their behavior while standing in the same environment that created it. Once you understand what your surroundings are actually doing to you, discipline stops being a fight. The environment that disciplines for you, the invisible hand. Here is something that should unsettle you. You are far less in control of your behavior than you believe. Not because you are weak, but because your environment is constantly making decisions for you, and you do not notice it happening. This is what behavioral economists call choice architecture. The way options are presented to you shapes what you choose, often more powerfully than your intentions do. If your phone is on your desk, you will check it. Not because you lack discipline, but because the easiest available action is the one your brain will take. If unhealthy food is visible in your kitchen, you will eat it. Not because you are gluttonous, but because visibility drives consumption. The researchers Brian Wansink and his colleagues demonstrated this repeatedly. People eat more from larger plates, snack more when food is visible, and make hundreds of micro-decisions every day, based not on hunger, but on proximity. The disciplined person is not the one who resists temptation more heroically. The disciplined person is the one who removed the temptation before it arrived. Friction as your greatest ally. Another one that sneaks in. Most people think the path to discipline is removing obstacles from the things they want to do. It is the opposite. You want to make the disciplined behaviors frictionless and the distracting behaviors difficult. Put your workout clothes next to your bed the night before. Remove social media apps from your phone's home screen. Keep your journal open on your desk. Set up your workspace before you go to sleep. Each of these is a small act of environmental design. None of them requires willpower in the moment, but together, they tilt the entire field. James Clear calls this environment design and considers it one of the most underused tools in behavior change. He writes that the people with the best self-control are typically the ones who need to use it the least, because they have designed their surroundings so that the right choice is the easy choice. Ask yourself, when was the last time you deliberately redesigned your environment to support the person you are trying to become? The people you surround yourself with. The final one is the hardest to hear. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. This idea, often attributed to Jim Rohn, has been echoed by researchers and practitioners across disciplines, but it goes deeper than influence. The people around you create norms, and norms govern behavior more powerfully than intentions ever could. If everyone in your circle stays up late, eats poorly, and drifts from one distraction to the next, your discipline will feel like swimming against a current. Not because they are bad people, but because norms are invisible gravity. The quiet discipline approach is not to cut people out of your life dramatically. It is to become intentional about whose norms you absorb. Find one person who moves the way you want to move. Spend more time around them. Watch how they think. Notice what they treat as normal. Discipline is contagious, but so is its absence. Choose your exposure carefully. We arrive now at the quiet protocol, systems that outlast motivation, and this is the center of everything we are building toward. What follows is not a list of tips. It is a framework that makes discipline feel less like a battle and more like breathing. The quiet protocol, systems that outlast motivation. The 3 questions. Every system for quiet discipline begins with 3 questions, not complex ones, but ones most people never ask. First, what is the smallest version of this that still counts? Most people set ambitious targets and then collapse under them. They plan to write for an hour, exercise for 45 minutes, meditate for 20. When they miss, and they will miss, the gap between the target and reality creates shame. Shame kills momentum, and the habit dies. The quiet protocol asks instead, what is the version of this that is so small it feels almost ridiculous? Write 1 paragraph, do 5 push-ups, sit in stillness for 2 minutes. If you do this consistently, you have won. Not because the output is impressive, but because the system held. And systems that hold, grow. Second, What is the trigger? Every habit needs a cue, something that already happens in your day that you can attach the new behavior to. After I pour my coffee, I write. After I brush my teeth, I stretch. After I close my laptop, I walk. The trigger does the remembering for you. No willpower required. Third, what is the celebration? This sounds strange to the quiet, serious mind, but it is one of the most evidence-backed strategies in behavior design. B.J. Fogg, who runs the Behavior Design Lab at Stanford, has shown that the single most effective way to wire in a new habit is to celebrate immediately after completing it, even in a small, internal way. A quiet thought, a brief moment of acknowledgement. The brain encodes the behavior as rewarding, and rewarded behaviors repeat. The minimum viable day. Here is what helps when motivation disappears entirely. Create what I call a minimum viable day. This is the floor, the version of your discipline that holds even when everything is falling apart. If your normal protocol is 1 hour of deep work, your minimum viable day might be 15 minutes. If your normal protocol is a full workout, your minimum might be a walk. The minimum viable day is not the goal. It is the safety net. And here is why it matters. When you miss a day completely, shame enters. And shame, as we have seen, is the enemy of sustained discipline. But when you hit your minimum, even on the worst days, the identity holds, the system survives, and you wake up the next day still in the game. Dr. Jordan Peterson has spoken about this in the context of clinical practice, the importance of negotiating with yourself rather than tyrannizing yourself. Set a target you can actually hit, then hit it. The momentum compounds. The weekly review. The final piece of the quiet protocol is the review. Once a week for 10 minutes, ask yourself 3 things. What worked this week? What did not? What one change would make next week easier? Do not overcomplicate this. Do not turn it into a performance review of your soul. Just look at the data, adjust, move forward. This is the mechanism that prevents drift. Without it, even the best systems degrade over time. With it, your systems evolve alongside you. Charles Duhigg, in his research on organizational habits, identified this same principle at work in the most effective companies and individuals. They did not just set systems, they reviewed them. Regularly. Without drama. Start there. Small, consistent, reviewed. We arrive now at when rest becomes discipline. And this is where the quiet approach separates itself from every loud, grinding, burnout philosophy you have ever encountered. What you are about to hear might feel counterintuitive, but it may be the piece that has been missing your entire life. When rest becomes discipline, the grind that eats itself. There is a version of discipline that looks impressive from the outside. Early mornings, long hours, no days off, relentless forward motion. It photographs well, it makes for good captions, and it almost always ends the same way. The body keeps score. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's work on trauma and the body revealed something that applies far beyond trauma alone. The body registers what the mind suppresses. When you push without recovery, you are not building discipline. You are borrowing from a future version of yourself who will have to pay the debt, with interest. Burnout is not a failure of discipline. Burnout is what happens when discipline has no recovery built into it. The quiet discipline approach does not fear rest, it plans for it. The recovery that produces more than the grind. Matthew Walker, the sleep scientist at UC Berkeley, has demonstrated something that should reshape how you think about discipline entirely. Sleep is not a break from productivity. Sleep is a performance-enhancing activity. During deep sleep, the brain consolidates learning, clears metabolic waste, and restores the prefrontal cortex, the very part of the brain responsible for focus, decision-making, and impulse control. In other words, the part of your brain that generates discipline is physically restored during sleep. Skipping sleep to be more disciplined is like skipping meals to be stronger. The math does not work, but it goes beyond sleep. Recovery includes any activity that allows your nervous system to downshift from sympathetic arousal, fight or flight, into parasympathetic restoration. A walk without a phone, 10 minutes of stillness, a conversation with someone who does not need anything from you. These are not indulgences. They are maintenance for the system that produces discipline. Ask yourself, when was the last time you treated rest as a discipline rather than a failure of it? The Sabbath principle. There is an ancient wisdom here that modern productivity culture has almost entirely forgotten. The idea of a day of rest, a Sabbath, was not a suggestion. It was structured into the rhythm of life itself. One day where you are not producing, not optimizing, not grinding. One day where you simply are. This is not religious doctrine. It is a design principle that has survived thousands of years because it works. The quiet discipline approach builds this in intentionally, not as a reward for hard work, but as part of the work itself, because a discipline that cannot rest cannot last. Before we look at the bridge protocol, the thing that carries you across the moments when everything in you wants to stop, drop where you are watching from in the comments. Sometimes knowing someone in your own city or your own time zone is carrying the same invisible weight makes it a little easier to bear. Now let's move on to the bridge when you want to stop. We arrive now at the bridge when you want to stop, and this is the section that separates those who sustain quiet discipline from those who fall away silently. Every disciplined life contains this moment. What you do with it determines everything that follows. The bridge when you want to stop. The moment that decides everything. There will come a moment. It may have already arrived for you many times. You have been consistent for a few weeks. The system is working. The identity is settling in. And then something disrupts it. A stressful week, an illness, a travel day, a mood that descends without explanation, and suddenly the habit you were building feels distant, foreign, like something that belonged to a different version of you. This is the moment where most people stop, not because they are weak, but because they interpret the disruption as failure, and failure, to the undisciplined mind, means the whole thing was a lie. Here is the truth. The disruption is not the failure. The disruption is part of the protocol. Every disciplined life contains interruptions. The difference is not whether they happen, it is what you do in the 48 hours after they happen. The 48-hour rule. Here is what helps in the moment after disruption. You have 48 hours. If you return to your protocol within 2 days of falling off, the neural pathways are still intact. The identity is still accessible. The system has not collapsed. If you wait a week, the rebuild is significantly harder. This is not opinion. It is neuroscience. The basal ganglia, which encodes habitual behavior, begins to prune unused pathways relatively quickly. Not overnight, but within days. The 48-hour rule is your bridge. It does not require you to be perfect. It only requires you to return quickly. Missed a day of writing. Write something, anything, within 48 hours. Even a sentence counts. Missed a workout. Move your body within 48 hours. A walk, 5 minutes of stretching. The action itself is small. What it preserves is enormous. It preserves the identity. It preserves the momentum. It preserves the quiet knowledge that you are still someone who returns. What to say to yourself in the gap. The final piece is internal. When you have fallen off, and you will, the conversation you have with yourself in those 48 hours matters more than anything else you do. Most people use that window to shame themselves. You failed. You are undisciplined. You always do this. And that voice is the one that extends a 2-day gap into a 2-month abandonment. The quiet discipline approach says something different. You did not fail. You paused. Pauses are human. Now you are returning. And returning is the entire game. Ask yourself, when was the last time you spoke to yourself with that kind of steadiness? The bridge is not built of willpower. It is built of self-compassion that refuses to let a pause become a permanent stop. We arrive now at the final section, making quiet discipline yours, because none of this matters if it stays in this video. What follows is the quiet handoff, from principle to practice, from concept to your actual life. Making quiet discipline yours. One thing, you have heard a lot in the last hour: systems, identity, environment, recovery, bridges. If you try to implement all of it at once, you will implement none of it. So here is what I want you to do. Pick one thing, not 3, not 5. 1. Maybe it is the minimum viable day. Maybe it is the 48-hour rule. Maybe it is the environmental redesign. Pick the one that landed deepest, the one you felt in your chest. Start there. Tomorrow, not next week, not when you feel ready. One small act, one shift, one piece of evidence that you are someone who follows through. The quiet return. And when you fall off, because you will, return quietly. No drama, no self-condemnation, no declaration that you are starting over. Just return. The most disciplined people you will ever meet are not the ones who never miss. They are the ones who have mastered the art of the quiet return. They fall. They pause. They come back. Without fanfare. Without apology. Without the weight of shame slowing the return. That is quiet discipline, not the absence of imperfection, but the steady, patient, unglamorous practice of coming back. Closing reflection. There is a scripture that has carried many through the long, invisible work of becoming. Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you? You are not your own. You were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. Whether you call it God or the universe, or simply the deep intelligence of a life honestly examined, the principle remains the same. You were not built to be depleted. You were built to be whole. The discipline you are building is not about punishment or performance. It is about honoring the life you were given, treating it as something worth caring for, something worth returning to. Quiet discipline is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not need applause. It is simply the steady daily decision to show up for your own life and to return when you have wandered. That is the work. That is the practice. That is the quiet way. This is Quiet Grind Daily, where self-improvers reset, calm mind, consistent action.